we're going to be appropriately covering Esherick's lovely print, also entitled February, that we see here on the screen. So for today, just for a roadmap, I'll first provide some context around Esherick's printmaking practice before we do some in-depth coverage of this print that was first struck in 1922. And then we'll kind of take a little bit of a sidestep and we'll move into talking about this print's relationship as well as Wharton's engagement around the Works Progress Administration in the following decade during the 1930s. So, as many of you know, I'm sure, Wharton began printmaking in the early 1920s when he was given the opportunity to create woodblock print illustrations for Mary Marcy's book, Rhymes of Early Jungle Folk, which was a book of rhymes about evolution for kids. And Esherick's printmaking practice from there developed over the next 15 years, during which he carved hundreds of woodblocks and wood engravings, illustrated numerous books and periodicals, experimented with a few different types of printmaking media, and connected with print curators, gallerists, and other modernist printmakers across the region and country. So I'd like to think based off some of Wharton's letters from the mid 1930s, a time when his furniture making and interior decoration practice was starting to grow, um, that had those practices not grown and Wharton not received those large commissions that he had in the 30s, he would have been printmaking through the end of his lifetime, or at least I'd like to think that. Next slide. All right. So February is a relatively simple print from Esherick's portfolio. It was made towards the very beginning of Esherick's printmaking stint, which again lasted from the early 1920s through roughly the mid 1930s. And February, as we see here, depicts what should be a very familiar scene to many of us in the region in 2026 after these big snowstorms. A very densely wooded forest covered completely with snow. And here on the right side of the screen, we have a photo of the Wharton Esherick Museum from after the winter storm in late January that we just recovered from. So February is part of a larger series of seasoned theme prints that Esherick created around the same time between 1922 and 1924. That also included a print called January Here, March, the Manure Spreader, April Plowing, which is a wood engraving, and then December here on the bottom right of the screen. Esherick first struck February in 1922, as we already talked about, and we can see some documentation from this in an account book that Letty Esherick kept to document her husband's budding career in the arts. This account book is a really great resource for us today and helps us understand when artworks were made, when and where they were exhibited and sold, what things Wharton sold, what things he gifted, and what orders he received from clients to fulfill later on. And here we see the first two notations for February during the 1922 season in red here. So February was exhibited a number of times during the 1920s at various museums, clubs, and art galleries. And it was also a part of some of the earliest exhibitions that Esherick was sending prints to. So, for example, the exhibition Philadelphia Etchers and Engravers, which took place in October 1923 at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which was then known as the Pennsylvania Museum of Industrial Art, actually included Esherick's print February alongside a few others: March, the Manure Spreader, April Plowing, and September. We learn from a newspaper clipping that reviewed this exhibition that Wharton and Letty actually ended up pasting and keeping in a scrapbook, that Wharton's prints were the only woodcuts included in the exhibition. And it appears that March the Manure Spreader, which we saw right here, um, was actually a huge hit. And the newspaper review reprinted a copy of March the Manure Spreader and wrote that out of all the works in the exhibition, quote, none is more striking than the woodcut print by Mr. Esherick reproduced above. Esherick began selling copies of February through a number of galleries around the East Coast as early as June 1923. Galleries like Via in New York, McLee's Gallery in Philadelphia, Grace Horn's Gallery in Boston, Massachusetts, as well as the Wilmington Fine Arts Clubs and many others were carrying and selling Esherick's print February. And a copy of this print traveled as far as Topeka, Kansas for an exhibition at the Mulvane Art Museum for a print show that was organized by a gentleman named Edward Longstreth. And he organized the show through one of the university clubs in Philadelphia. In 1922, the year that it was first struck, Esherick was selling February and a lot of his other prints for just $2 a piece. Esherick sold a few copies of February to friends and neighbors, such as Dorothy Cantrell, whose home we see here depicted in Christmas Snows, as well as his friend Arthur Peck. And we can see that Arthur Peck ordered a number of prints, including February, Fire, January, and February, all sold for $2 a piece. But the biggest break for this print came the next year in June 1923, when it was published in the major American periodical, The Century Illustrated Monthly Magazine, alongside one of Esherick's bookplates and the prints Building, March, The Manure Spreader, and January. The publication paid Esherick a total of $250 for reproducing his work, which was a big sum compared to the $2 that he was selling them at individually. And Wharton's prints were also accompanied by a short blurb that extolled his work. So, to quote the Century Illustrated Monthly Magazine around Wharton's work, they write, "Only those who have the pleasure of looking through his portfolio of prints will guess how hard it is for the Century's art department not to strike work and immediately make a pilgrimage to Esherick's farm in Paoli." So after his prints were included in this magazine, Esherick ended up upping the price for these prints to $3.50, presumably knowing that their inclusion in the magazine would create some demand. Wharton successfully sold copies at this higher price point to folks in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, Pleasantville, New York, Baltimore, Maryland, and as far afield as Edinburgh, Scotland. You have to wonder whether these early clients might have caught wind of Wharton's work through this magazine. And Esherick upped the price of prints again to $5.50 in 1924, and then to $6.50 the following year. And he continued to frequently sell, gift, and receive orders for February at this price point through 1925, until newer and more technically complex prints, I think, began to supersede it in interest and demand. So the print February had a pretty quiet period from the late 1920s to the mid 1930s, during which Esherick had devoted so much of his attention to making furniture, sculpture, and interior decoration commissions. During the mid 1930s, when the Depression was in full force and the Works Progress Administration was formed, artists were hired as part of a 5,000 plus person workforce employed by the Federal Artist Project. According to Bob Bascom's biography of Esherick, who was Wharton's son-in-law, Esherick did apply to be part of the Works Progress Administration, but ended up being rejected due to having received more than the equivalent minimum wage for that year through his furniture and sculpture practice. And a number of important commissions for folks like Helene Fisher, Marjorie Content, the Cook family, and Curtis Bach, alongside Letty Esherick's resourcefulness in selling flowers, vegetables, taking in boarders to help make ends meet for the family, all kind of carried the Esherick folks through the Depression era. And interestingly enough, the progressive lifestyle that the Eshericks were leading in Paoli was kind of seen as a possible solution to the period's economic depression. So, an exhibition that Esherick had at the Philadelphia Art Alliance in 1932, alongside his two good friends, Henry Varnum Poor, a potter, and Ruth Reeves, a textile designer, really appeared to resonate with people who were feeling the plight from the Depression. So this review that we have clipped up on the screen here from the Philadelphia Ledger, or I'm sorry, the Philadelphia Record, entitled Craftsmen Adopt Pioneer Ways, Wrest All Need from Nature, Urge Jobless Back to Land, seems to suggest that people who saw this exhibition and the critics who reviewed it saw that this group of artists and their experiments in living could possibly be a solution to the joblessness that people were experiencing in cities. The article highlighted Esherick's studio as an example of self-sufficiency and living off the land. However, this article does so in such a way that I think readers were probably led to suggest that Wharton's family was untouched by the Depression, or that their progressive experimental lifestyle was anything but challenging. So I think that that's kind of an interesting way that they eschewed Esherick's own challenges as kind of a solution to other challenges during the period. So while Wharton Esherick was not able to be involved in the WPA directly, both of his friends and colleagues, Henry Varnum Poor and Ruth Reeves, were in fact involved. So Henry Varnum Poor was hired to make mosaic and fresco murals in places like the Chicago Uptown Post Office, Penn State University, and federal buildings like the Department of Interior and the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Ruth Reeves was also involved in muraling during this time and worked on a stained glass mural for a high school in Long Island City. And we can see on the screen on the left, Ruth Reeves working on that mosaic mural. But in contrast to Henry Varnum Poor, Reeves had arguably a larger contribution to the WPA, and that was contributing and helping create the Index of American Design. So the Index of American Design was a works progress administration program that was aimed at producing a survey of the American decorative arts and crafts from the colonial period up through about the turn of the 20th century, with the goal of kind of identifying a national design heritage for the United States. Esherick's friend and colleague Ruth Reeves was very interested in creating an index like this due to some of the struggles that she had in her own professional life, and approached the director of the Federal Artist Project, whose name was Holger Cahill, with an idea for this project after she identified a need for a visual design archive to serve a growing number of commercial artists in the United States and its developing ad industry. And Reeves was ultimately named the first national supervisor for this project, and later served as a field advisor working with other artists throughout the country. And here we just see a couple of these illustrations that were produced as a part of the Index of American Design. So here we have a Pennsylvania German plate, what appears to be a kind of shaker or shaker style chair, and then this lovely watercolor of a cocktail lounge from the 1940s. And here on the other side of the screen, we have this lovely image from the National Gallery of Art with some folks who are actually at work creating the index. So during its 6 years of funding, the Index of American Design ultimately created over 18,000 watercolor illustrations, photographs, and drawings of heritage design objects made by around 1,000 different artists across the United States. And works from the WPA were starting to be exhibited at institutions around the country in the late 1930s, and an official book of the work was published in 1950. And here we see some of the exhibition posters as the index was making its way around different galleries and museums. And here we have a lovely photo from the Downtown Gallery in New York City of one of these exhibitions. So while Esherick wasn't directly involved in the WPA, he was an appreciator of their work and also a beneficiary. So Esherick actually attended one of these exhibitions of the works from the Index of American Design in 1936, while this project was still ongoing, at a small gallery that was run by Mary Curran called the Little Gallery of Contemporary Art, which is no longer in existence, but was based on 13th and Spruce Street in Philadelphia, just about 3 blocks from where I'm sitting today. And Curran herself was an artist who was involved in the WPA, just like Ruth Reeves and Henry Varnum Poor. And the fact that she was running a gallery, I think, helped her um, get work from this project and host it at her gallery for exhibition. So, after seeing this exhibition at Mary Curran's little gallery, Wharton personally wrote to the director of the Federal Artist Project, Holger Cahill, and we have those 2 letters here. And Wharton wrote to tell Holger Cahill after seeing this exhibition at Mary Curran's little gallery, quote, "The work being produced under Mary Curran's direction amazed and delighted me." Esherick will go on in the letters to write that he found, quote, himself continually reflecting on the collection of pottery, furniture, interiors, etc. of early America. I wanted to own a collection of reproductions, or rather have it at hand for reference, Wharton goes on to write. I am not at all interested in whether these things are pure American, or whether they were done or when they were done or what they were used for, but I am interested in the beauty of design and the sincerity of execution. These common little necessities of life were lifted out of the ordinary by the affectionate hand which designed and made them, and the result is we, years afterwards, protect and preserve them. And I think that's a really wonderful sentiment coming from Wharton at that time. And as we see here on the screen, Esherick's admiration for this project, the inspiration that he took from these works of American design, and the interest in using them as a reference guide of his own, just as someone like Ruth Reeves had intended, ultimately did pay off. So Wharton does go on in these letters to inquire with Holger Cahill whether there would ultimately be a publication of all the work from the index that would be put out there, because Wharton would really like to have a collection for his own library. And he hears in response from Holger Cahill that, quote, "We are collecting the material from the field and intend to publish a series of portfolios by the Color Lithography Project, and these will be made available to students in all parts of the country." And while the index wasn't published until 1950, Esherick did acquire himself a copy for his personal library that we see here on the screen and inscribes it with his name and the date as well. So Wharton not only benefited from the works of the Index of American Design and the book that they later published, but he also indirectly benefited from another project that seems to have been funded by the program, the American Block Print Calendar. So these spiral-bound calendars were published between the years 1937 and 1939 by the Gutenberg Publishing Company based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Each one of these calendars contains one work by an American artist per week of the calendar. And it was designed in such a way that the pages could be torn right out of the spiral binding, matted to hide the dates at the bottom, and framed for someone's wall. It also had a panel at the back that we see here that could swing out so that you could have your calendar standing up nicely for display as well. And the goal with the introduction of these calendars was to support contemporary artists by bringing art into contemporary American homes in a useful and affordable way. The cost of each of these calendars was about $1.50, and artists received compensation through royalties. So, in newspapers and periodicals from the period, we can see some fun advertisements that highlight the fact that this was a very unique calendar meant for people who appreciated and loved art. So, here on the top right of this screenshot, we're seeing an ad for the American Block Print Calendar. And to pique interest, some of these ads state that some prints were struck directly from the block, and that in contrast to other calendars of the time featuring, quote, most gaudily banal and taste-destroying art, probably comparable to the calendars that we see at like grocery store checkout lines or at our local CVS, that the American block print calendar was paving the way for improvements in the American calendar industry. So Esherick's print February was included in the 1937 American block print calendar, naturally marking the last days of January into those early first days of February as we see here, going from Sunday the 31st to Saturday, February 6th. And despite largely having left the press behind in the middle of that decade, it's really interesting that Esherick was included in this calendar with a number of active contemporary printmakers who he had been exhibiting with throughout the 1920s and early 30s, like Marguerite and William Zorach, Peggy Bacon, Wanda Gog, Howard Cook, Emil Ganzo, Mabel Dwight, Rockwell Kent, and many, many others. And even after leaving his printmaking practice behind and gaining notoriety in other medium, particularly furniture and sculpture, Esherick was seen as an American printmaker notable enough to include and codify in this Depression era calendar. And I think in part this shows us that Esherick had indeed left a mark on the field of American printmaking after only working in the medium for a little over a decade and a half, but ultimately gaining the most notoriety in another medium. So that is about all that we have for today's talk. And I just wanted to highlight some of our upcoming events that we have. So on Sunday, March 1st, the Wharton Esherick Museum officially opens for its first day of tours in 2026, and we'll be hosting a member open house from 10 to 11. Our first book club meeting of the year for Off the Shelf will be the evening of March 11th. And we'll actually be reading a story that Wharton wrote about the creation of his 1926 studio. We'll be hosting an in-person event to build on our spring collections exhibition in mid-March. And then coming down the line into April, we have another in-person program exploring Esherick's days as a painter. And then our imprint reception in April has gone up on the website as well. We don't yet have our listing for next month's Spotlight, but we'll be hosting our 2025 Artist in Resident Kelly Cobb on March 31st at 1:30 p.m. instead of our normal 12 o'clock time due to Kelly's teaching schedule. And we'll be talking about some of the afterlives of Kelly's residency as it relates to the life and work of Letty Esherick. And we'll also start to tease out an event that we're hosting in May around the peonies and a kind of product that Kelly has been working on that grew out of her residency project. So if anyone has any questions about today's talk, I'm happy to reshare my screen and go to any slides that people want to see or talk about.
I have a question, Ethan.
Yeah,
In that photo from the scrapbook where Wharton is at the press, could you tell what building he's in? Is that the studio or is that his old barn studio down by the farmhouse?
yeah, let's take a look. So this is a photograph that was, or it's a newspaper clipping that was recently digitized as part of a partnership that we worked with the Winterthur Museum to digitize. So this is Esherick's scrapbook here, and presumably it was created by Letty, kind of documenting the publicity that Wharton was getting throughout his career. But if I can zoom in and just move the screen share where it needs to go, here we can see that photo blown up. Um, I am not quite sure, Holly, where this photo was taken,
What do
but
you know what year it is? Because if it's before 1926, it couldn't have been the
yeah,
current
it's from
studio.
1924. So it's
Oh,
presumably
okay.
either at
Huh.
Sunnycrest or in the barn next door.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, great. I hadn't seen that one before.
Yeah, it's a really lovely one. We only otherwise have this photo of Esherick at the
Yeah,
press in action, which is used a lot.
the studio. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I see we have another question.
Is that me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to share um, about how I got two of the wood blocks. And many, I don't know if other people on this call have them or not, but I was one of the founding members of the studio. And Bob told me that it was the first 100 people that sent in a check. We were named founding members just because. So that was the year that they opened. the studio and started to solicit donations. And for the check, I got a free rock in the water, and then I also got moonlight in the meadow because I thought it was so beautiful. So I just wanted to share that.
Oh, those are two very lovely prints, and I think we might
Yes.
have some copies from that period of restrike still on site as well.
And
Yeah.
yes, and so I got a restrike for $25.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I guess I'd just like to add, I love the fact that the cards um, reproduce some of the wood blocks. Like
Yeah.
February, I remember that was my Christmas card 1 year. I remember.
Oh, that's lovely. And that's very in line with the American block print calendar as well.
Aha.
Yeah. All right. Well, unless we have any other questions, I think we could probably wrap up for the day. People are always welcome to shoot me an email if something comes up later. You can reach me at ethan@whartonesherickmuseum.org, and we'll be sending out a follow-up email in the coming days with some extra resources and things for people. And we'll probably be able to include a digitized version of the block print calendar so people can actually take a look through all the months and see who is represented.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Ethan.